Shocking betrayal. I came to my son's workplace hoping for family support, but his colleague grabbed me and whispered, "Don't sign anything and run." I slipped out the back door, and 5 minutes later, I had 37 missed calls. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The front door exploded open without warning. Daniel burst through, his face chalk white, clutching crumpled papers that shook in his trembling hands. My evening teacup slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. "Dad, it's over. The FBI could come any minute." Documents scattered across my coffee table like autumn leaves in a hurricane. Bank statements, legal notices, numbers bleeding red across white pages. Daniel's designer suit hung wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. He looked like a man running from ghosts. "Slow down, son." I set my newspaper aside, reaching toward him. "What's happened?" $2.3 million, his voice cracked. "We owe $2.3 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. I watched my son pace my modest living room like a caged animal, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the oak floors. The warm lamplight that usually made everything feel cozy now cast harsh shadows across his gaunt features. "The charges—" Daniel pulled another paper from his jacket. His hands shook so violently the words blurred. "Wire fraud with client data, money laundering through shell companies, federal financial law violations, securities fraud, tax evasion, RICO conspiracy charges, computer fraud, and abuse." Each charge dropped like a death sentence. Daniel's voice grew quieter with every word until he was barely whispering. The old mantel clock ticked loudly in the sudden silence. "Son, you'll handle this. You always find a way out." "Handle this?" Daniel spun toward me, his eyes wild. "Dad, they have everything. Bank records, email chains, encrypted communications. They've been watching us for months." I reached for his shoulder, the same gesture I'd used when he was small and scared. Daniel knocked my hand away so hard I stumbled backward. "You should help with actions, not empty words." "I don't understand your financial schemes. I can't help with anything." "Of course you can't." Daniel's laugh was bitter, hollow. "While I was building an empire, you were reading your newspapers and drinking your tea. While I was making millions, you were living in this museum." The words stung more than any physical blow. I looked around my home, the worn leather armchair where I'd read bedtime stories, the family photos on the mantelpiece showing happier times, the curtains my late wife had sewn 30 years ago. Everything Daniel now saw as failure. "When I was young, you taught me about honesty, integrity, doing the right thing." Daniel's voice turned cruel. "But honesty doesn't pay rent. Integrity doesn't buy respect. And doing the right thing gets you a government pension and a house that's falling apart." "Daniel, please." "No!" He swept the remaining papers off the table. I needed a father who understood business, who could help me navigate this world. Instead, I got lectures about character, while my competitors got trust funds and connections. The smell of my cooling coffee filled the air between us. Outside, Chicago's February wind rattled the windows. Daniel stood in the doorway now, his silhouette framed against the hallway light. "Tomorrow morning, I'll fix this myself, the way I've fixed everything else while you sat here feeling righteous about your simple little life." The front door slammed so hard the family photos trembled on their shelves. Through the window, I watched Daniel's BMW speed away, its red taillights disappearing into the winter darkness. The scattered documents lay at my feet like evidence of some terrible crime. I sank back into my armchair, surrounded by the wreckage of whatever my son had become. The car engine's sound faded into Chicago's nighttime hum. I bent slowly, my joints protesting, gathering the scattered papers with shaking hands. Bank statements, legal documents, numbers that made no sense to my engineer's mind. The torn edges felt sharp against my calloused fingers. In the kitchen, I made coffee more from habit than desire. The familiar routine, measuring grounds, adding water, pressing the button, helped steady my hands, but my mind kept replaying Daniel's face, that wild desperation I'd never seen before. When did he become so cruel? That boy who dreamed of changing the world. The coffee percolated while I carried a photo album to my study. Dust motes danced in the lamplight as I opened to 2015. There was Daniel at 32, bright-eyed and confident, standing beside his first office door. The Data Secure Solutions sign looked enormous compared to the tiny rented space behind it. "We're going to revolutionize financial data security, Dad," his voice echoed from memory. "Companies lose billions every year to cyber theft. We'll be their guardians." I remembered the smell of new carpet, the sound of boxes being unpacked. Daniel had worked 18-hour days, surviving on pizza and determination. "My son, the entrepreneur," I told neighbors proudly. The next photos showed rapid growth. Bigger offices, more employees, Daniel in business magazines. But somewhere around 2018, something shifted. The photos changed too. Fewer family gatherings, more solo shots of Daniel with clients I didn't recognize. 2020 brought the first suspicious conversation. Daniel had mentioned an offshore client, some complex deal he couldn't explain. When I asked questions, he'd become evasive. "You wouldn't understand the complexity, Dad." That expensive watch appeared around then, the BMW replacing his practical Honda, designer suits replacing off-the-rack shirts. When I asked about the sudden wealth, Daniel just smiled. "Business is good, Dad. Very good." I flipped to Christmas 2018, our last normal holiday. Daniel looked genuinely happy then, carving turkey while telling jokes. What happened to that man? When did success become whatever brought the FBI to his door? The photos blurred as exhaustion crept in. My coffee grew cold while I compared past Daniel with tonight's desperate stranger. The boy who'd once built model bridges in my basement had become someone who spoke of honesty as weakness. Outside, the February wind howled through bare branches. The house settled with familiar creaks. I found myself remembering smaller moments. Daniel's college graduation, his first business award, the pride in his eyes when he'd shown me that initial office. Had I failed him somehow? Should I have understood his world better, supported his ambitions more actively? The engineering principles I'd taught him, precision, integrity, building things that last, seemed quaint in whatever universe he now inhabited. My head grew heavy. The photo album slipped lower on my lap as sleep approached. The last thing I remembered was Daniel's face from that Christmas photo, young and hopeful and nothing like the frightened man who'd stormed out tonight. The phone's shrill ring jolted me awake at 8:45 a.m. My neck ached from sleeping in the chair. The photo album slid to the floor as I fumbled toward the kitchen, confused about time and place. "Dad, come to the office right now!" Daniel's voice exploded through the phone before I could say hello. I pressed the receiver closer, still groggy from my uncomfortable night in the armchair. "What happened? Why such a rush?" "I'll explain on site. The driver's already coming to you." "Driver? Daniel, what?" "Everything gets resolved right now. Just trust me, okay? 10 minutes. The line went dead. I stared at the silent receiver, Daniel's urgency still echoing in my ear. He'd spoken faster than usual, his words tumbling over each other like someone running out of time. In my bedroom, I grabbed clothes quickly. Khakis, a button-down shirt, my warmest jacket. February in Chicago demanded layers. My reflection in the mirror showed an old man with rumpled hair and worried eyes. Someone pulled into events beyond his understanding. Should I call someone? Robert Lewis, my lawyer friend? But Daniel had sounded so certain, so desperate for immediate action. Whatever was happening, waiting seemed impossible. From my front window, I watched the quiet suburban street. Most neighbors were already at work. The Hendersons' house stood dark, the Johnsons' driveway empty. Evanston morning silence surrounded me like a cocoon I was about to leave forever. A black sedan appeared at the corner, moving with purpose down my street. Not Daniel's BMW. This was bigger, more formal, with tinted windows that reflected the overcast sky. Professional, serious. The kind of car that meant business I didn't understand. The engine's low hum grew louder as it approached. My stomach tightened with each second. Daniel had arranged this overnight, which meant he'd planned whatever was coming while I slept, surrounded by scattered documents and fading memories. The car stopped, perfectly aligned with my walkway. No honking, no rushed gestures, just patient waiting. Through the tinted windshield, I could barely make out the driver's silhouette. Everything about the moment felt calculated, official, like stepping into a world where old engineers didn't belong. I checked my pocket for wallet and keys one final time. The familiar weight of my house key felt strangely significant, as if I might not need it again soon. The thought sent ice through my veins. At the front door, I paused with my hand on the knob. Daniel's voice from last night echoed, "Tomorrow morning, I'll fix this myself." Was this his solution? Some plan that required dragging his father into whatever storm he'd created? The February air hit my face like a slap when I opened the door. Chicago winter didn't forgive hesitation. The black sedan waited, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold air, professional, anonymous, patient as death. My feet crunched on the frost-covered walkway. Behind me, my house stood warm and familiar, filled with 40 years of memories. Ahead waited that mysterious car and whatever resolution Daniel had promised. The distance between my front door and the sedan's rear handle felt like crossing into a different world entirely. Cold February air shocked my lungs as I stepped outside. The black sedan waited, engine purring, exhaust visible in the frigid morning. Before I could hesitate further, the passenger door swung open from within. Leather seats embraced me with unexpected warmth. The driver was younger than I'd expected. Military posture, buzzed hair, eyes that had seen things mine never would. His nameplate read, Thomas Clark. "Thomas, what happened with the company?" "Not my business, sir." His voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone following orders. Nothing more. We pulled away from my quiet suburban street. Evanston's tree-lined roads gave way to busier thoroughfares as we approached the Kennedy Expressway. I tried again. "Daniel seemed pretty shaken up last night. Is the situation really that bad?" Thomas adjusted his rearview mirror. "Can't say, sir." The highway stretched ahead, downtown Chicago's skyline growing larger with each passing mile. Glass towers caught the morning light, reflecting a city that never slept. Traffic moved in predictable patterns around us. Commuters heading to jobs I couldn't fathom, living lives that intersected briefly with ours before diverging again. "Been working for Daniel long?" "Not long." Thomas merged smoothly into faster traffic. His hands remained at 10 and 2, professional as a chauffeur in some old movie. I gave up trying to extract conversation. Through tinted windows, I watched Chicago transform from residential neighborhoods to commercial districts. The radio played softly, news reports about weather, traffic, politics that seemed distant from whatever crisis had gripped my son. My watch read 9:15 when downtown's canyon of buildings swallowed us whole. Pedestrians moved with purpose along sidewalks, bundled against the cold but determined. Steam rose from manholes like urban geysers. Everything felt more urgent here, more alive than my quiet Evanston street. The sedan turned onto LaSalle Street, pulling alongside a 40-story glass tower that stretched toward the gray February sky. Corporate plaza fountains sat frozen, their sculptural ice formations catching light like crystal. Business professionals streamed past in expensive coats, talking into phones or checking tablets. "This is it." Thomas parked smoothly in a space that seemed reserved specifically for us. Inside the lobby, marble floors gleamed under high ceilings. A security desk dominated the center, manned by guards who looked more like former police than building staff. Corporate artwork lined the walls, abstract pieces that probably cost more than my annual pension. "Mr. Snyder is expecting you in office 2347. The guard handed me a visitor badge without checking identification. He knew who I was. The elevator climbed through floors of corporate America. Through glass walls, I glimpsed conference rooms, cubicle farms, offices with panoramic city views. Everything spoke of success, of money moving in ways I'd never understood during my engineering career. 23rd floor. The doors opened onto gray carpet and fluorescent lighting. Data Secure Solutions logos marked glass-walled offices where people typed at computers, spoke into headsets, moved with the controlled energy of a successful business. Office 2347 sat at the corridor's end. Through the glass wall, I could see Daniel's silhouette and another man standing near floor-to-ceiling windows. Their voices carried through the door, urgent, discussing something that made Daniel gesture emphatically. My hand found the door handle. Whatever crisis had brought me here, whatever solution Daniel needed, I was ready to help my son however I could. The door swung open to reveal Daniel, mid-sentence, gesturing toward documents spread across a conference table. He spun toward me, his face lighting up with relief, so genuine I felt my own tension ease. "Dad, you're going to save our company." Daniel rushed forward, embracing me with the enthusiasm of a child, showing off a perfect report card. His arms felt strong around my shoulders, his cologne expensive and familiar. The desperate man from last night had been replaced by someone confident, almost jubilant. "Finally going to explain what's happening? We'll solve everything right now." Daniel led me toward the conference table, where documents waited in neat piles. "Just sign these papers. It's transferring shares to your name for tax benefits." The office screamed success. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, awards covering one wall like trophies. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago spread below us in all directions. Framed articles showed Daniel in business magazines, shaking hands with politicians, accepting awards. "Dad, meet Mark Richardson, my business partner." A man near the windows turned, extending his hand reluctantly. Mark appeared nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot, avoiding direct eye contact. His handshake felt cold, distracted. "Mr. Snyder." Mark's greeting came out strained, formal. "Mark's been helping me restructure the company finances." Daniel positioned me at the conference table. Documents fanned out like playing cards. "These papers will protect our family assets while we resolve the temporary cash flow issues." The legal documents looked official. Corporate letterheads, multiple signature pages, language dense with terms I didn't recognize. Daniel had placed expensive pens at strategic intervals, ready for signing. "This seems complicated for a simple transfer." "Modern business requires modern solutions." Daniel's laugh sounded forced now that I listened closely. "Trust me, Dad. When did I ever steer you wrong?" Mark shifted again near the window, checking his watch. Something about his behavior bothered me. The way he avoided participating in our conversation, the tension in his shoulders, his obvious desire to be anywhere else. I reached for one of the documents, trying to parse legal jargon that might as well have been written in Sanskrit. Phrases like nominal director and personal liability jumped out, but their context remained unclear. A sharp knock interrupted my reading. Emma Wilson, a young woman in professional attire, entered without waiting for permission. "Mr. Snyder, you're urgently needed on the phone." Daniel's confident expression flickered momentarily before recovering. "Can't it wait? We're in the middle of—" "It's about the Michigan Avenue situation," they said immediately. "Of course." Daniel squeezed my shoulder paternal, the loving father helping his family through crisis. "Dad, just look over the papers. I'll be right back. This won't take long." The door closed behind Daniel and Emma, their voices fading down the hallway. Suddenly, the office felt different, quieter, more tense. Mark remained by the window, but his posture had changed. His reflection in the glass showed a man wrestling with some internal decision. I picked up the pen closest to the signature lines. Whatever these documents contained, they would help my son navigate his business crisis. After 40 years of engineering precision, signing papers to support families seemed simple enough. The pen felt heavier than it should have in my fingers. Mark's hand shot out, grabbing my sleeve just as the pen touched paper. "Stop! Don't sign anything! Get out of here!" The urgency in his voice froze my blood. Documents scattered as I jerked backward, the pen clattering to the floor. "What are you saying?" "Your son wants to transfer all debts and criminal responsibility to you." Mark's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. "These documents make you nominal director and personally responsible for $2.3 million in debt." My world tilted sideways. The elegant office, the loving reunion, Daniel's confident embrace, everything suddenly felt like stage props in some elaborate theater. "That's impossible. He's my son." "Right now, FBI is searching another company office. You have maybe 5 minutes to disappear." Mark pointed at the documents with shaking fingers. "Look at page 3. Backdated contracts making you responsible for everything. All the wire fraud, money laundering, securities violations, they become your crimes the moment you sign." The pages blurred as I tried to focus. There it was, buried in legal language. Personal liability clauses, financial responsibility transfers, signature lines that would transform me from retired engineer to federal criminal. "He planned this." The words came out as barely a whisper. "My own son planned to destroy me." Daniel's been setting this up for months. The company crisis, the desperate phone call bringing you here, all of it choreographed? Mark glanced toward the door nervously. He could come back any second. My hand shook as I pulled out my smartphone, photographing page after page. The camera captured corporate letterheads, backdated signatures, clauses that would have made me liable for crimes I'd never heard of until yesterday. Why are you helping me? Because I can't watch an innocent man get framed. Mark moved toward the door, listening for footsteps, even if it cost me everything. What happens when Daniel realizes? We worry about that later. Right now, you need to disappear before FBI locks down this building. Mark led me through a side door I hadn't noticed, into service corridors that smelled of industrial cleaning supplies. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on concrete walls. Our footsteps echoed in the narrow space. Service elevator to parking garage, exit on State Street, not LaSalle. 23 floors of service stairs stretched below us. My legs, already weak with shock, protested each step. Metal railings felt cold under my grip. Mark stayed close, occasionally checking his phone for messages. Daniel will know you helped me. Maybe, but I'll deal with that consequences. Mark's voice carried grim determination. What I can't deal with is staying silent while he destroys his own father. 15 floors. 10. My breathing grew labored, sweat mixing with February cold from the stairwell. Each step took me further from the trap Daniel had prepared, closer to whatever came next. If you need testimony, evidence, anything, call me. Mark pressed a business card into my hand. But be careful. Daniel's not finished with you yet. 5 floors. 3. The parking garage level appeared through a door marked emergency exit only. Mark hesitated at the threshold. I have to go back. If Daniel suspects... Thank you. The words felt inadequate for what he'd risked. I won't forget this. Just stay alive, Mr. Snyder. That's thanks enough. State Street's cold air hit my face like freedom itself. Pedestrians moved around me, oblivious to the trap I'd just escaped. Behind me, the glass tower stretched toward gray sky, holding secrets that could have destroyed everything I'd built in 68 years of honest living. My phone buzzed. 37 missed calls from Daniel. He knew I'd escaped. State Street's cold air burned my lungs as I stumbled away from the building, legs still shaking from 23 floors of concrete stairs. Behind me, the glass tower stretched toward gray February sky, holding secrets that had almost destroyed me. My phone buzzed. Daniel. First missed call. Mr. Snyder! I spun around to see Mark emerging from the same exit, breathing hard, sweat visible despite the cold. He glanced nervously at the building behind us, then grabbed my elbow. Take these stairs to the basement. There's an exit to State Street. What about you? I need to go back so he won't suspect. Mark's military bearing couldn't hide his fear. Daniel will realize you're gone in minutes, maybe less. My phone vibrated again. Call number 2. How long has this been planned? The question came out broken, defeated. Months, maybe longer. Mark checked his watch, then the building entrance. Those documents were prepared specifically for you. Backdated signatures, financial transfers, everything designed to make you look like the mastermind. The weight of betrayal pressed against my chest like a physical force. While I'd been worrying about my son's business troubles, he'd been constructing an elaborate trap designed to destroy me. Get to a lawyer. You have the evidence. Mark pressed a business card into my trembling hand. His personal cell number was written on the back in blue ink. Will you be safe? Safer than you right now. His laugh held no humor. Daniel's desperate. He'll try everything. Guilt, threats, manipulation. Don't answer his calls. Phone call 3, 4. The vibrations felt like electric shocks against my leg. If this goes to court, I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I know about the document preparation, the timeline, his intentions. Mark's voice carried the weight of a man who'd made an irreversible decision. 10 years building this partnership, and I'm throwing it away for someone I barely know. Why? Because my daughter is 7 years old, and someday I want to look her in the eye and know I did the right thing when it mattered. Downtown Chicago flowed around us, business suits hurrying past, taxi horns, the urban symphony of a city that never paused for individual tragedies. We were just 2 men having a conversation on a sidewalk, invisible among millions. Call 5, 6, 7. He's panicking. Mark nodded toward my vibrating phone. That's good. Panic makes people make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind that help prosecutors build cases. Mark extended his hand for a final handshake. Remember, you escaped because you had help from someone inside his own company. That means something to judges and juries. I watched Mark disappear back into the building through a different entrance, probably explaining his absence with some fabricated errand. The glass doors swallowed him like a mouth closing, leaving me alone on State Street with a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. Call 8, 9, 10. The crowd carried me along their predetermined paths. People with jobs to reach, meetings to attend, lives that made sense. I felt like a ghost drifting through their solid world, carrying evidence of crimes I still couldn't fully comprehend. By call 15, my hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. By call 20, I switched it to silent mode, watching the screen light up repeatedly like a beacon of my son's desperation. The taxi stand sat 2 blocks away. Behind me, the office building grew smaller, but never disappeared entirely. Somewhere in that tower, Daniel was discovering that his carefully planned trap had failed, that his father had escaped with evidence that could destroy him instead. Call 25, 26. The screen showed Daniel's son with mechanical persistence. My finger hovered over the decline button as Daniel's son glowed accusingly on the screen. Call 27. I pressed decline and immediately another call came through. 28. The relentless pattern had become a form of psychological torture. Taxi! A yellow cab pulled to the curb, its driver looking at me with professional concern. My hands shook as I fumbled with the door handle, the morning's adrenaline finally catching up with my 68-year-old body. Where to? 150 LaSalle Street, and faster, please. You okay, sir? You look shaken up. Call 29, 30. The phone lit up silently in my lap, like some sort of electronic heartbeat. Family troubles, the understatement of the century. Chicago's morning traffic moved with stubborn slowness through downtown streets. Each red light felt like an eternity, each delay another opportunity for Daniel to track me down. The driver offered water from a bottle he kept up front, tissues from a box on the dashboard, small kindnesses that felt enormous in my current state. Call 31. I finally checked the voicemail. Dad, there was a misunderstanding. Mark is confused. Come back and let's fix this. His voice sounded concerned, loving, the same tone he'd used as a child when he'd broken something and wanted to avoid punishment. The manipulation was so perfect, it made my stomach turn. Call 33. Another voicemail. You're making a huge mistake. Those documents aren't what he told you. Now desperation crept into his voice, the careful control beginning to crack. Through the taxi's windows, I watched Chicago neighborhoods pass like scenes from someone else's life. The engineering firm where I'd worked for 30 years. The restaurant where Daniel and I had celebrated his first business contract. The park where I'd taught him to throw a baseball. Every landmark now contaminated by the knowledge of what he'd become. Call 35. Voicemail again. I'm your son. How can you believe a stranger over family? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He'd planned to frame his own father for federal crimes, then had the audacity to question my loyalty to family. I pulled out the phone photos of the documents, studying them during traffic delays. Even without legal training, I could see my name scattered throughout multiple pages, signature lines prepared specifically for me, dates that would make me appear involved in decisions I'd never heard of. You have no idea what kind of trouble you're creating for both of us. Call 37 carried a different tone entirely. The mask was slipping. Beneath the false concern and manipulation lay something colder, more calculating. This was the voice of someone who'd spent months planning my destruction, frustrated that his target had escaped. The taxi turned onto LaSalle Street, approaching the address Robert Lewis had given me years ago when he'd started at his own practice. A modest building compared to Daniel's corporate tower, but it represented something Daniel's world had forgotten entirely. Honest work for honest pay. This is it, I paid the driver, adding a generous tip for his patience and concern. Take care of yourself, sir. Whatever's happening, I hope it works out. Call 37 had been the last one. My phone finally fell silent as I stood before the law office building, looking up at windows that promised sanctuary from the electronic harassment. 37 calls in 90 minutes. Mathematical proof of Daniel's desperation. The building directory showed Robert Lewis, attorney at law, on the 7th floor. As the elevator climbed, I tried to organize the chaos in my mind. How do you explain to a friend that your own son has become a monster? How do you ask for help when the enemy shares your name and your blood? The elevator dinged softly at the 7th floor. Down the hallway, behind a door marked with modest lettering, waited answers I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The law office smelled of leather books and strong coffee, familiar scents from a world where words had precise meanings and justice still existed as more than an abstract concept. Robert Lewis looked up from his desk, concern creasing his weathered face as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Wilfred, this is more serious than it seems." We'd been friends for 40 years, but I'd never seen Robert's expression quite like this. Professional outrage mixed with personal protectiveness. The document photos glowed on his computer screen, legal language that had seemed confusing, now rendered deadly clear by his expertise. How much more serious? If you had signed, you would have become personally responsible for all company debts and criminal charges. 15-20 years in prison. The number hit me like a physical blow. 20 years. At 68, that meant dying behind bars for crimes I'd never committed, destroyed by the son I'd raised to value honesty above profit. Your son is using backdated contracts. This means legally you would have become co-owner from last year. Robert's finger traced lines of text on his screen, showing me clauses that would have retroactively made me appear responsible for decisions made while I was reading newspapers in my living room. He's been planning this for months? Based on these dates and the sophistication involved, yes. This isn't something you create overnight. Robert leaned back in his chair, professional anger radiating from his posture. "Wilfred, in 30 years of practice, this is the most cynical manipulation I've ever encountered." The coffee cup in my hands grew cold as Robert explained the technical mechanisms Daniel had prepared. Personal guarantees that would have made my house and savings liable for company debts. Corporate structure changes that would have positioned me as the decision-maker for all the wire fraud, money laundering, and securities violations. The federal prosecutors would have seen you as the mastermind, an experienced engineer using technical knowledge to commit sophisticated financial crimes. But I don't know anything about financial crimes. That wouldn't matter. These documents create a paper trail showing months of involvement. Your signature would have validated everything retroactively. Robert pulled up federal sentencing guidelines on another screen, showing me the mathematical reality of white-collar crime punishment. The numbers were merciless. Financial fraud carried mandatory minimums that didn't bend for age, confusion, or family manipulation. What about the $2.3 million debt? Personal liability. They would have taken your house, your savings, your pension, everything. Robert's voice carried the weight of legal certainty. Your son engineered complete financial and criminal destruction. My phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel again, but Robert held up his hand. "Don't read it. From now on, all communication goes through me. You're not just a victim anymore. You're a witness to attempted fraud." The shift in terminology felt significant. Victim implied helplessness. Witness implied power. What do? We go on the offensive. Criminal complaint against Daniel for attempted fraud. Civil lawsuit for attempted financial destruction. Restraining order based on harassment. 37 phone calls constitute stalking under Illinois law. Robert's transformation from concerned friend to aggressive advocate was complete. This wasn't just legal advice anymore. It was war planning. The FBI is already investigating the company's financial crimes. When we present this evidence, it changes their entire case. Instead of your son being a defendant, he becomes the primary target. Will Mark Richardson be safe? We'll make sure of it. His testimony is crucial, and witness protection protocols exist for exactly these situations. Robert began organizing documents, creating files, building the foundation for what he clearly saw as a winnable battle. His certainty helped quiet the chaos in my mind, replacing panic with something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Hope. One more thing, Wilfred. When this goes to court, and it will go to court, juries hate family betrayal more than almost any other crime. What your son attempted doesn't just violate federal law, it violates every basic human decency. I stood to leave, feeling steadier than I had since yesterday evening. The documents that had almost destroyed me were now weapons in my own defense. The son who'd planned my ruin had instead provided evidence of his own crimes. The elevator doors opened as I reached for the call button, but my phone rang before I could step inside. Not Daniel this time, an unknown number I didn't recognize. My finger hovered over the screen, uncertain whether this was salvation or a new form of danger. The taxi pulled into my driveway at 6:20 p.m., and my heart sank. Daniel's BMW sat there like a predator, waiting for prey, chrome bumper reflecting the streetlights that had just flickered on. He'd been waiting, planning this ambush while I met with Robert, while I learned the full scope of his betrayal. "Keep the meter running," I told the driver, then reconsidered. This needed to end tonight. Daniel emerged from his car as I paid the fare, moving toward me with false urgency. 3 cigarette butts lay crushed near his feet. Unusual for him, a sign of how badly his world was unraveling. "Dad, finally! I've been calling all day." His appearance shocked me. Wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, dark circles under eyes that had once sparkled with ambition. The successful businessman from this morning had been replaced by someone desperate and dangerous. "Where have you been? Why won't you answer my calls?" "I know about your plan, Daniel." The words stopped him mid-stride. His false concern flickered like a broken neon sign, replaced by something calculating and cold. "What plan? I was trying to save you." "Save me?" My voice carried the strength Robert's consultation had given me. "You wanted to make me your scapegoat. That's not. Mark doesn't understand business. He's lying to you." Daniel's panic leaked through his attempted control. "I'm your son. How can you believe strangers over me?" Neighbors' curtains twitched in nearby windows. The Henderson family across the street pretended to check their mailbox while obviously listening. Our family destruction was becoming suburban entertainment. 15 to 20 years in prison, Daniel. That's what you planned for me. His face went white. The specific knowledge meant I'd talked to lawyers, meant his manipulation had completely failed. "You ungrateful old man, I built everything." The mask finally slipped away entirely. "You could have taken the fall. You're old anyway." "The son I raised is gone. I don't know who you are." Daniel's fist slammed into his BMW's hood, denting the expensive metal. The sound echoed through the quiet suburban evening like a gunshot. "You think you're so righteous?" His voice rose to a shout that carried to every house on the block. "You lived your small, pathetic life while I created an empire. And when I needed help, what did you do? Nothing. I raised you to be honest, to build things that last, to care about people more than profit." "Honesty?" Daniel laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Honesty gets you a pension and a falling-apart house in Evanston. I chose success. You chose to destroy your own father." The words hung in the cold February air between us. Behind those words lay 37 phone calls, months of planning, documents designed to steal my freedom and my life. Behind them lay every loving moment we'd shared, now revealed as preparation for ultimate betrayal. "I don't need a father who won't help his own son." Daniel's voice cracked with rage and desperation. "You want to play victim? Fine. Play victim in court. Play victim to your lawyer friends. But don't expect me to pretend I still care. I never expected you to care. Not after this morning." Daniel moved toward his car, then spun back for one final blow. "Forget the word dad. To me, you're just Wilfred now." The BMW's engine roared to life with unnecessary aggression. Tires screeched against asphalt as Daniel reversed out of my driveway, leaving black marks on concrete I'd sealed myself last spring. The sound faded into Chicago's urban hum, carrying with it the last remnants of whatever relationship we'd once had. I stood alone in my driveway, house key in my trembling hand, surrounded by the wreckage of a family that had taken 42 years to build and one morning to destroy completely. The front door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it open and stepped into the sanctuary of my own home. The months between February and May moved with the grinding pace of federal justice. FBI completed their investigation, finding even more financial irregularities than initially discovered. I testified twice before grand juries, worked closely with Robert on legal strategy, and watched from a distance as Daniel's world crumbled. His company collapsed, his assets were frozen, and his former business associates distanced themselves like he carried a contagious disease. May 20th arrived with the weight of finality. Federal Courthouse, Northern District of Illinois, stood like a monument to justice in downtown Chicago. Marble columns reached toward morning sky, American flag hanging motionless in the still air. Media vans lined the street. Our story had captured public attention as the ultimate family betrayal. Local executive tried to frame own father, the headlines wrote themselves. Inside courtroom 2347, the same number as Daniel's office, a coincidence that felt like cosmic irony, I took my seat in the gallery. Daniel sat at the defendant's table in orange jumpsuit and shackles, the successful businessman completely erased. His expensive suit had been replaced by prison uniform, his confident posture broken by months in federal custody. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. Mark Richardson took the witness stand first, his voice shaking with emotion but steady in purpose. I could not allow an innocent person to suffer. He looked directly at Daniel as he spoke. The defendant spent months preparing documents that would have transferred all criminal liability to his elderly father. Cross-examination tried to portray Mark as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the technical evidence was overwhelming. My phone photos appeared on courtroom screens, document after document showing backdated signatures, personal liability transfers, corporate structure manipulation designed to frame me for crimes I'd never heard of. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs. 68 years old, facing a courtroom full of strangers, describing how my own son had tried to destroy me. He didn't just try to steal my money, I told the judge. He tried to steal my freedom. He tried to steal my final years and give them to the federal prison system. Daniel never looked at me during my testimony. He stared at the table, shoulders hunched, a broken man who'd gambled everything on manipulation and lost. The prosecutor's closing argument was devastating. The defendant attempted to frame his own father for financial crimes, engineered months of preparation, and showed complete disregard for family bonds that should be sacred. Defense attorney's plea for leniency fell flat. How do you defend the indefensible? Daniel Snyder, you are found guilty on all 7 counts of the indictment. Judge Morrison's voice carried the weight of federal authority. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, securities violations, each count another year of Daniel's life measured in concrete and steel. The betrayal of family trust makes this crime particularly heinous. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, plus $5 million in fines and restitution. Daniel's shoulders shook, his head fell into shackled hands. Reality had finally penetrated his narcissistic delusion. 12 years. At 42, he'd emerge at 54, middle-aged and broken. No parole in federal system. He'd serve every day that justice demanded. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Robert guided me to his car through a crowd of cameras and microphones, protecting me from public spectacle the way he'd protected me from legal destruction. How do you feel about your son's sentence? I couldn't explain that justice and grief occupied the same space in my heart. The man who'd tried to destroy me was also the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle. The criminal deserved every year of his sentence. The father in me still mourned the son who'd died long before this trial began. As we drove away from downtown Chicago toward Evanston, I looked back at the federal courthouse one final time, then faced forward toward whatever came next. The months after the trial were a blur of practical decisions. I put the Evanston house on the market in June. Too many painful memories in every room. By July, I'd found a small lakeside cottage in Madison, Wisconsin, far enough from Chicago to feel like a new world, close enough for Robert to visit. The moving trucks came on a sweltering August morning, carrying 40 years of accumulated life toward an uncertain future. Now, 15 days later, I stood on my new deck, watching sunrise paint Lake Mendota in shades of gold and amber. Morning, Max. The rescue dog looked up from his favorite spot near my feet, tail wagging with the enthusiasm of someone who'd also been given a second chance. We'd found each other at the Madison Animal Shelter 3 days after I'd arrived, 2 survivors learning to trust again. Coffee steamed in the morning air as I settled into the wooden chair I'd bought from a local craftsman. Simple furniture for a simpler life. The cottage was modest, 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, living room with fieldstone fireplace, but every inch felt like freedom. Madison mornings were quiet in ways Chicago never was. No traffic symphonies, no urban urgency, just lake water lapping against the shore, birds announcing another day, peaceful silence that let me think clearly for the first time in months. Mr. Snyder? Mail delivery. The postal carrier, a cheerful woman named Betty, handed me an envelope with familiar handwriting. Mark Richardson's letter carried news that made me smile for the first time in days. His job search had succeeded, a small consulting firm in Minneapolis that valued integrity over connections. Some betrayals teach us who our real friends are, he wrote. You saved my conscience as much as I helped save you. The lake stretched toward the horizon, dotted with fishing boats, taking advantage of perfect August weather. Somewhere across those waters, people were living ordinary lives, problems measured in mortgage payments and work deadlines, rather than federal indictments and family destruction. Welcome to our little community. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached with a covered casserole, the universal small-town greeting for newcomers. Thank you. It's so quiet after Chicago. That's why we love it here. Peace and quiet, friendly neighbors, simple living. She looked toward Max, who'd approached for inspection. Rescue dog? We rescued each other. 3 months of cottage life had established routines that felt like healing. Morning walks with Max along the shoreline, afternoon projects, fixing loose shutters, planting a small garden that would bloom next spring, evening reading in the chair by the fireplace, books chosen for pleasure rather than escape from trauma. The hardware store owner, Jim Patterson, had become an unofficial advisor for cottage maintenance. City fellow learning country living, he'd joke, but his advice was generous and his company welcome. Garden's looking good, he'd said yesterday. Tomatoes should be ready by Labor Day. Simple conversations about simple things. No one here knew about Chicago, about trials, about sons who become strangers. I was just Wilfred, the retired engineer who'd moved to the lake for peace and quiet. Sometimes I wondered about Daniel. 12 years stretched ahead of him like an unchangeable sentence. Federal prison somewhere, learning to live within walls and schedules imposed by others. Did he think about our last conversation? Did he remember being 7 years old, proud of the birdhouse we'd built together? Probably not. Narcissists don't waste time on regret. Justice had prevailed. Mark had found new work with honest people. I discovered that starting over at 68 was possible, even liberating. The money from the house sale provided modest security. Robert visited monthly, bringing legal updates and old friendship. Max stretched in the morning sun, then padded toward the cottage for breakfast. Simple needs, easily satisfied. We'd both learned that love didn't require blood relations. Sometimes chosen family proved more reliable than genetic accidents. Standing to follow him inside, I looked across Lake Mendota toward the future. At 68, I discovered I was stronger than I knew. Sometimes the greatest gift of betrayal is learning who you really are when everything else falls away. Behind me, the sunrise painted the cottage in warm light. Ahead, whatever came next waited with the patience of lake water against the shore. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.